views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey folks, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. As you probably know, this is the program where we get to talk to Bronx journalists, Bronx editors, Bronx photographers, find out what's going on behind the scenes of all the news that you read and hear about. And tonight we've got an excellent show because we're raising the level a little bit. We've got two editors for you, not just writers and journalists. And so stick around. We're going to have a good time and we're going to learn something. Let's start off with Michael Hinman over there in the west part of the Bronx at the Riverdale Press, the editor of the Riverdale Press. Nice to have you with us, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Gary.
Always good to have you because you always have something good. I got a sneak preview of the paper. I know the paper just came out today and everybody's reading it and trying to find out what's going on in Riverdale. I am really interested in the story that's on the A section. I guess it's on the right side about the Hebrew Institute. So I'm going to review and then I'm going to ask you your thoughts about it. So the Hebrew Institute has been one of the, most progressive, if you will, most forward-thinking religious institutions of any denomination in the Bronx. And then there was a kind of a higher power that said, on the same-sex marriage thing, maybe you ought to back off. Fascinating story. Why don't you give us a little background about it?
Yeah, I mean, the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, I guess from what I understand, that they have always kind of welcomed, or not welcomed, like more like congratulated same-sex couples, usually when they get married or meet some of their other milestones. But apparently the Orthodox Union had some issues with that, and they shut that down. Of course, nobody's really talking about it. I mean, there's just been more or less, just chatter here and there. But, I mean, all we know is, like, right now they're not doing that. But the Hebrew Institute says that they're not stopping celebrating same-sex couples, but I guess they're just not doing it in the same way now. They're going to try to find a way.
And that really brings up a really interesting distinction to me because it's not like they were conducting same-sex marriages, I guess as part of orthodoxy rules or guidelines or whatever it is. Then, they weren't doing that. All they were doing was saying, if you get married, we're going to say, hey, congratulations as part of our community outreach. And yet that was still no good. Kind of a fascinating little distinction, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, because to be honest, I have not personally seen like what they were writing or what they were saying, but I mean, I think that it's still a wedding as a wedding, and I mean, it's still two people getting together, and it just seems a nice thing to do is to congratulate them. I mean, if two people I didn't like got married, I would still congratulate them.
Well, that's a nice attitude. You're a good guy then.
I wouldn't give them a gift.
Are the people, the rabbi and other people at the Hebrew Institute, are they upset about this, or they're just going to comply and we all will move on? I mean, after the show is over and your paper runs its course, it'll be done.
Well, I mean, I think that once, unfortunately, the rabbi, they didn't really want to talk because I think that they were afraid that the media wouldn't portray this, with the sensitivity they were looking for. I'm not quite sure like how else it could be portrayed. I mean, obviously our approach is to be fair about it and to, and to present all sides of the issue. But they haven't really said much about it, to be honest. So like our story kind of had to focus a little bit about, where the Jewish faith is, especially with the Orthodoxy, where it is with same-sex unions and other diversity issues that are out there, really.
Yeah, we could probably take a larger look at it, and frankly, I'm not going to do that and talk about the Supreme Court and the trends in the country. Maybe it's born of that, but I don't really know. I think we'll leave it there and move on to another story. PS 24, one of the most highly regarded public schools maybe in the Bronx, is undergoing an expansion, right? You have a rather, and your wonderful education reporter, Lisa Herndon, did a story about the expansion at PS 24. Talk to me about all the issues and, what's involved in this whole thing.
Yeah, they want to expand. I think that's probably where we have to kind of make sure that we make that distinction, because it basically is that they have to. I mean, obviously, a lot of schools in the Bronx are overcrowded, but especially over here on the west side, there's a lot of overcrowded schools. And and PS24 used to have some annex space over at the Whitehall, but they lost that space about a year ago, and they really haven't had anywhere else to go. So they've been converting certain portions of the school, like their cold lunch cafeteria and some of their other places. But they need to be able to build another wing, but they don't have any real plans yet to do that. Like, at least from what they've told the community board over here, they don't have actual plans yet. But the idea overall seems to be to build another wing, maybe cut into parkland, which it's not quite clear how that would be done, because it's not just the school district that has to sign off, but then the parks department too, or whoever also is in control of that property. So I mean, they're not necessarily locked over there, but there's not a lot of room to really do much.
Is there a feeling, or do you have a feeling about the community and local people, what they're thinking about it? Well previous to your coming to the Bronx, there was just an immense uproar when we had the old-fashioned, so to speak, community school districts. District 10 was severely overcrowded, and that's why we ended up getting, was it 368, and the other new schools that were built next to where Kennedy High School is. And so I'm always interested, my antenna goes up when I hear about the schools in Riverdale being expanded, because my own sense of local history takes me back to those days, and we had some fights over that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, but overcrowding is an issue here. And I've actually covered school districts in Florida where back in the day, where, I mean, they were doing double sessions where, I mean, half the school met in the morning, the other half met in the afternoon, where they would have probably more portable classrooms than indoor classrooms, and all kinds of other issues. So, I mean, not to say that it's not as bad up here, but I know that there's a lot of issues, and that I believe pretty much most, if not all, of the public schools at least have some type of overcrowding issue, or at least on the brink of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the possibility, just the discussion of potentially even using parkland. Boy, I got to tell you, given all the fights that we've had in the Bronx over those kinds of things over the recent past, I would imagine that's got to be a non-starter. You're not, I mean, I realize schools may be a more valued thing by the community, but I'd be shocked if, especially in that area where the parks are around PS24, I'd be shocked if they ate up any parkland for school space.
Yeah,
That's my own thought.
That would be hard to get through.
I got two more issues for you. One is this whole idea of fishing in the mail. I mean, I'm happily not of a criminal mind, so I don't, the idea of pulling out envelopes and then using that somehow to my advantage, like cashing checks, or I guess somebody knows how to do this stuff. Now Marble Hill, I know Norwood had a big problem with it. Now Marble Hill has got a big issue with fishing. Is that what we're reading in the Riverdale press?
Yeah, and a lot of the problem, I think, is that the mailboxes are old, and they weren't really designed to protect against this type of thing, because it really was not that common, I guess, back when these mailboxes were constructed, I guess, probably in the 40s, 50s, who knows when those boxes came in. But the post office has been working to pull in more mailboxes, or at least to upgrade them. But at the same time, we have some of our local leaders talking about the fact that a lot of mailboxes are disappearing too. So it's so they're pulling mailboxes. We're being told that they're going to be replaced, but some of them haven't been replaced in a long time. So it's actually limiting where people can drop off mail, and I think that might even make it easier for people to go fishing, because now everything's more centralized. You don't have to go from mailbox to mailbox.
Right, and also the boxes would be fuller, and so the mail will be higher up. I guess it's easier. But wait, am I to understand, because in many of the neighborhoods, even adjacent to that part of the Bronx, where Marble Hill is, they've replaced the mailboxes and they put the little slots there. So, in fact, I mailed a letter this morning into one of those slots. It was funny because I went up to it and I went like this, and I went, oh, wait a minute, there's no... So I put in the slot. So am I to understand that the Marble Hill mailboxes have not been retrofitted in that way?
Yeah, slot? a lot of the mailboxes look like they've come from, my grandfather's time.
Oh, my... You see, listen, we can talk shop on here and tell the truth. I think that's unforgivable. If you're going to replace them in one neighborhood, replace them in all the neighborhoods, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I think they're doing. I think it just takes time to roll it out because I'm sure those aren't cheap. Because mailboxes cannot be cheap at all. So.
having never bought one, I really I couldn't tell you. Listen, here's another issue, and I don't know that I saw it in the paper this week, but I've seen it on the very popular Riverdale Facebook page, and you've been active on it. This idea that people not only are stealing hubcaps or stealing rims, but stealing the whole wheels off cars. I can't even imagine. I guess what I can't imagine is the time it takes to do that in the middle of the night and nobody sees it or hears it. It blows my mind, really, that there's actually been a trend of this nature, that somebody will show up and their car is on wood blocks or the wheels are gone and it's down on the ground.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually covered this probably in the beginning of December, really before, like everyone else kind of picked up on it. But, the biggest, it seems like the biggest target are newer Hondas, because apparently older Hondas can take the tires from the newer Hondas. So they steal the tires from the new Hondas so they can take them back to the old Hondas, I guess. I'm not quite sure exactly what they're doing with them when they steal them. But, I mean, Gary, you know this, but car burglaries is probably the most common crime you're going to get everywhere. And yeah, so you're seeing a lot of it because people are posting a lot of it and they're talking about it. But, but car burglaries, you're talking, this is something that happens in the hundreds every year. Wow. I mean, if you don't go a day or two, especially in a metro area without a car burglar, that'd be amazing. But, it's actually a very common crime. And it's weird when they're stealing doors or when they're stealing tires, or like we reported several months ago, where they're stealing catalytic converters out of cars.
Yes, well, that had been actually going on for a long time. I guess the conclusion on this, which you are entitled to say, and all of our beautiful, wonderful viewers, Gary is very naive. That's just the way I just can't believe. I saw another picture of somebody breaking a window. Can't we all just get along? Anyway, Michael, we're almost out of time. The last question for you, a personal question. You enjoying your time because you recent? So how long you been at the Riverdale Press, and have you been enjoying your time here?
Yeah, I've been here since last March, so it's been like almost 10 months now. Right. So, and I absolutely love it. I was in Florida over the holidays, and I got to meet up a lot of my old colleagues who had worked with me in the past 25 years or so. And they read our paper all the time because, of course, I'm always posting links on Facebook and such. Okay. And got a lot of great feedback, and I really couldn't wait to get back here. So. I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else right now at all.
Well, for those of us who have been here for a very long time, the Riverdale Press was always, as you well know, an award-winning and revered paper. And I have to tell you, it sure looks like it's right back to that standard now, and you deserve a lot of credit. So, and I will talk to you and see you around town, I'm sure.
Yeah, great, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
Michael, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. There you go, Michael Hinman of the Riverdale Press. Guess what's going to happen now? We're going to take a break. And then we're going to come back with another editor. It'll be Jarrett Murphy of City Limits. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort...
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son!
It's always worth it.
Whoa! Master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and it is my esteemed pleasure to go downtown and say hello to our good friend Jarrett Murphy, who is the editor at City Limits. Nice to have you with us again, Jarrett.
Thank you, Gary. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and all my good buddies down there at City Limits. Lots to talk about. Let's start with maybe the most recent, and that is Governor Cuomo and the idea of minority contracting. Scott Stringer has made a big deal of it during his time as city controller. What is the governor saying about minority contracting?
Well, what the governor did last week, basically at the last minute, was sign a law that had passed the legislature, both houses this summer. This is a law that was a real priority for Mayor de Blasio and the city. But what it essentially does is it alters procurement law to allow the city to use minority and women business ownership as a criteria for awarding contracts up to a higher threshold. To this point, contracts who were of a lower dollar value, they were allowed to use that mechanism. Now I think it will go up to $150,000 valued contracts. So basically it allows the city to pursue a long offered promise of getting more of its work to MWBE firms. It's something that the mayor has promised to do early in his term. People were pretty disappointed with performance on that. There have been some moves in the direction of trying to expand those rights, or those opportunities, I should say. And this signage by the governor, which was in some doubt in mid-December because it wasn't quite clear how he felt about it, I think the city sees it as a big step forward.
What it sounds like to me when you talk about a $150,000 threshold or maximum, is like it's really trying to help small businesses and encourage smaller contractors to get some of the work, as opposed to maybe some of the bigger contracts. But it really is more, it sounds like it's more of a grassroots plan.
I think so. And, that's where a lot of those firms are, is of the smaller size. One thing that minority and women business enterprises have complained about is that because they are relatively new, relatively undercapitalized, it's difficult for them to compete for the really big projects.
Of course.
So that's part of the logic of giving them, a sort of some advantage in getting a leg up on the smaller deals.
Somewhat broad speculation here, given the tenor throughout the country, frankly. Do you think it's can be challenged, the constitutionality of it can be challenged?
I suppose anything could be challenged, whether they have any merit or not. I don't know. I do know that the city is pretty careful about that when it comes to MWBE stuff, because they've been pushed to do other things, and the threat of a court challenge that could bring down not only the new provisions but the rest of the system is something that they often bring out. I think it's a legitimate fear. So I'd assume that this, having gone from the city up to the state, has been vetted as being pretty watertight. The smaller the contract, the more ability the state has to look at other factors. And I should mention that, all the other contracting rules apply, like, there can't be conflict of interest, people have to be qualified and all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
They have crafted I would assume, a fairly safe legal rationale for the law.
I want to get into the Right to Know Act, which took somewhat of a transformation before it got through the city council. And I will tell you that I read just about everything I could read on what had happened. And I'm going to announce it here that Jarrett Murphy's piece in City Limits was as good, if not the best one on it, to really understand what's going on. So why don't you, in your own words here on television, talk a little bit about the Right to Know Act, what it was, and then what actually got passed.
Well, thank you for the compliment, Gary. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is actually a two-bill package that has been really on the council's radar screen for more than 4 years.
That's right.
One bill affects the requirement that police officers inform people when they have the right to refuse a search in situations where they have the right to refuse a search. And the other would require officers to provide a business card, basically, with their name, rank, and badge number to people they encounter, because one of the big problems with civilian complaints in the city is that oftentimes the complaint has to be shelved because there's no identifying information on
who
the
the
officer.
cop is, yeah.
So these are bills that were proposed 4 years ago, kind of set on the back burner when the Inspector General bill was passed. They were revived under Speaker Melissa MarkViverito, but she resisted them. She cut a deal with the police department to basically create the rule changes internally through like NYPD procedures and rules.
She said it would be kind of like a gentleman's agreement, so to speak. That we understand.
Sort of, yeah, exactly.
There's no rules for it, but we'll do it right. I mean, boy, that
right.
never
They
works.
would add it to the patrol guide, which is their
Right.
kind of governing rule book, but it would not have the force of law, and that was resisted in the council. And so Antonio Reynoso of Brooklyn and Richie Torres from the Bronx continued to push their bills. And it went right to the end of the wire, the very last session of the council in this term. Both bills were amended, but advocates who've been pushing for both bills were much, much happier with Reynoso's bill, which governed searches and required police officers to say, you have the right to refuse this search. Then there were Torres's bill. Torres's bill got scaled back to not apply to so-called level 1 encounters, which are investigatory. In other words, before an officer thinks he has the means to accuse you of a crime, asking basic questions. And also traffic stops were exempted. And this cut out a huge number of the encounters between cops and civilians. So people who were pushing for a broader and more comprehensive bill really resisted that and hoped that Torres would drop the bill or force a vote on a stronger measure. And it was a very dramatic fight in the city council. As it turns out, that both bills passed overwhelmingly, but the resistance to the Torres bill, I think it was 27-20 was the final vote. By city council standards, that's a nail biter. So
That
there
is
was
very
quite
close,
a bit of
yeah.
resistance to it at the end. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you that I always thought through the whole dialogue of this, through Melissa MarkViverito's tenure as Speaker, I thought it was an odd position for her. It would be. It seems to me, given her record and the things she stood for and the things she fought for, this would have been one of those things that she would have just automatically pushed through. But clearly, she either had relationships in the police department or some other factor that had her hold back. I was frankly surprised that it took this long to get this passed.
Yes, I think what was at play here, this is my insight based on some facts and some supposition, is that MarkViverito had a very close working relationship with Mayor de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio had tense and complex relations with the police department and the rank and file. I think the idea was that de Blasio would veto the bill if it came out too strong because he has to maintain relations with the cops, and that MarkViverito did not want to foment a divisive confrontation with de Blasio over a veto of this bill. So I think that was the dynamic at play.
Yeah, that's wonderful analysis, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. We need to acknowledge, and I saw some analysis of this, I forget where I saw it, maybe in the Times or somewhere, that the city's crime numbers as released at the end of 2017 were just extraordinary. Nobody could be upset about the numbers. I mean, I realize there are pockets of things you say, well, this, that, and the other, but the murder rate was historically low. Crime was down literally everywhere in the city. And I saw analysis that said, for anybody who said that if you eliminate stop and frisk, it's going to drive crime back up, it didn't happen. And I think that a strong right to know act is not going to hurt. That's my own personal, this is put editorial underneath, is not going to hurt the crime numbers and maybe even continue to foster and create a partnership between communities and the police officers that serve them. And I think that is one of the biggest factors that has driven crime down. That's my soapbox.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think I didn't read the article. I just saw the headline today. But I think the National Review, of all places, is that with the story that de Blasio has earned the right to say, I told you so.
Yes, that's where it was.
People
Thank you very much. Right.
Who thought stop and frisk would mean the end of safety in New York City. So you're right. There's obviously been a continued historic drop in crime and I guess we'll see how far that can go under the current police commissioner.
This is an aside from the particulars. I have a personal feeling on this. I believe that the general public doesn't get enough credit, and I absolutely will credit the police department and credit the new tactics. And the Commissioner O'Neill has really been a revelation in many ways. But I think the people of the city of New York are committing less crimes, and they get a little credit. That's my own personal opinion.
I think that's right, Gary. Let me just jump in. I think that part of the whole story that is lost sometimes, going back to the 90s and the days of crack, is not just the general public, but organized communities and the role they played at making street corners and parks safe and working with the cops, sometimes at great peril to themselves. Grandmothers and mothers joining together to stare down drug dealers is a big part of the crime success story of New York that doesn't often get told.
You didn't write about this. I'm just curious since I have you on the phone. And, of course, we've had these 2 horrible fires over the last week in the Bronx. Do you see any legislation coming down as a result? I think my guess is there's going to be a crackdown on the doors closing and all that kind of thing. They're going to evaluate a lot of the buildings that aren't up to code. Any thoughts on that?
Well, one bill that we've written about that's been kind of on the back burner is to try to have the city require photoelectric smoke detectors. I should say, ionization smoke detectors. There are 2 different kinds of smoke detectors. One is more effective at not.
We got about
false
30
alarms.
seconds, so just be aware of that. Go ahead.
And so I think that you might see that come up, and I think there is now a push to require in new 1- and 2-family homes installation of fire suppression sprinklers. Those are the 2 areas you might see some push. The pushback will come from people who are worried about cost.
Jarrett, you and I got to sit down in a local establishment and continue to review this stuff, because having you on this show is an absolute pleasure, and I always appreciate your time.
As long as you're buying, Gary, I'm there.
Jarrett, say hello to the family, and thank you for joining us. There we go. That's the Bronx Buzz for tonight. We thank Michael Hinman from the Riverdale Press. We thank Jarrett Murphy from City Limits. And we, of course, thank you and wish you Happy New Year. We'll see you next week. Good night.
We are there, day 1, with baby names and a gift that lasts a lifetime. We are there as you grow, protecting you and those you love. We are there when you get your first job, helping you to save for the future. We are there when you marry your sweetheart, to help secure your new life together. We are there if the unexpected happens, to help you see life from a new perspective. We are there when you start your next chapter, to make sure you get off to a great start. And we are there when you lose your soulmate, to help make sure you will be all right. We are with you through life's journey. Social Security, securing today and tomorrow. Get to know us and see what you can do online at socialsecurity.gov.
This video produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
You made your house a reality. Homeschooling yourself on loans, color-coding listings, and flushing every toilet in a 20-mile radius. If you can ace house hunting, you can do it for retirement. Get on track with tips at aceyourretirement.org.